Today we jump into chapter 38, and this is like a little sidebar of the story we're currently in. We're in the middle of the story of Joseph, but it's interesting that they take a moment to take this little story quick and tell it. And while you read it, you may be saying, why is this in the Bible? Why is this a part of what's going on? And I think the most important part is there's two things, and we'll get to them at the end. The first thing is that it's important because this is how the lineage of Christ goes, that this is where the lineage is. It's not through Joseph, which I've always thought was an interesting thing of why is Joseph's story so big when he's not in the lineage of Christ? And I think that's because there are many roles that are important in Christianity, in our walk with God, that it's not just those that are in the lineage of Christ. We are all important, every last one of us. And so I think that this is showing where the line of Jesus comes from. And so we'll get into the story, but here we see that Judah, who is the one that is in the lineage of Christ, it's one of the brothers of Joseph, has this story where his sons, one of his first son marries Tamar, and he dies because he's wicked. It says that God says he was wicked. And so in lineage sake, if Judah was the line of Christ, God would not want it to come through a wickedness. So he wipes him out. And in their tradition, a brother is supposed to marry his wife or his brother's widow if they did not have children, or even anywhere to take care of them. It was part of the process of family and how it worked. And so he was supposed to take her as his wife and provide her with a child that would be in his brother's name for the lineage sake. And we see here that the second son that took her as his wife was happy to do the duties of a husband as far as in the sexual terms. He was ready for the pleasure of it, but he was evil in his heart because he didn't want a child to be brought up in someone else's name, only his name. And so instead of having this child, he did things to keep it from happening, right? We see that he does that, and the Lord sees that that is evil. And the reason that's evil is because it was narcissistic in the fact that he said, only if it's my line do I want it to go on. And so he stops that and he said, no, I don't want that. And guess what? God says, nope, also wicked. We don't want that to be the line that carries on. And so we see then that it's supposed to move to the third son. There's a third son, but Judah in fear says, I don't want my other son to die. Let's send her back to her family, which is a really vile thing of the culture, to send a widowed daughter back to her family. It was once you've taken them into your family, that's your responsibility. He had another son that was supposed to fulfill the duty. So he was wrong for sending her back to her family. And he says, yeah, when my third son's old enough, then you can marry him. And so she sees he's finally old enough to marry him, and Judah does not bring her to be his wife like he's supposed to. And so we see here Tamar takes it into her own hands. How many times have we been guilty of that? God's not doing what we think is supposed to happen. We're going to do it our way. And so what Tamar does is not right, but God in the middle of it still redeems it. And I think that that's what this whole story is about. And so we see that Tamar comes, she tricks Judah, she ends up pregnant with her father-in-law's child. What kind of Jerry Springer things are these? But this happens, and she has the child, and everything is brought to naught. And I think that this is an important verse. In verse 26, it says, and Judah acknowledged them, and he said, she's been more righteous and just than I, because I didn't give her to my son. And he never was with her again. So this wasn't an act of he was trying to take advantage. He knew she had done the right thing as far as trying to carry on the line. Now, what they did, both of them, was wrong. There is nothing right in how Tamar tricked him and what she did in the incestual relationship. None of this is right. But what's interesting is that when God has a plan, no matter what, he will carry it out. And I think that this is even interesting in the child that's born, because it actually ends up being twins. And the first child starts to come out, they tie a ribbon around its arm, and then instead the second child comes out first, which would be important. We see that God interrupts the normal cultural lineage of the firstborn being the one that brings on the lineage, but for the most part he sticks with that culture of the first child is the one that carries on the lineage. And so so much so God's plan was to come to pass that that second child, which was the one to be the lineage of Christ, came out first. And they even named him Perez, which means breaking forth. And so I think that the importance of this story, even though it's full of drama, full of disgusting behavior, is that at the end of the day, God's plan will always come to pass. I love that once said, it says, Perez is in the lineage of Christ despite his sinful parents. This goes to show that God ultimately chooses whom he will bestow grace and how his plan will works. It is not something that can be earned. And I think that this is a type and shadow for Christ. There's nothing we can do to earn it. We don't do it by good works or anything like that. Even when we're vile and sin, just like Tamar and Judah, that we still can have the promises of God because it's him who has the plan and him who bestows grace. So today I encourage you, no matter where you're at in that thing, where you're at in your walk with God, remember that no matter what, God will have his plan. Let's line up with it and not try to do it in our own ways like Tamar and Judah. Join us next time as we jump into chapter 39.